There he is. Ah, big one. Creeped it right over that brush pile and he hit it hard. I don't know, he's acting big. Is he big? Oh gosh, yeah, big one. Woo! Come on, baby. Yeah. Come here, baby. Oh. God. Oh. Oh, look at that big old tub. Look at that big old tub. I got him like a taco. I got him like a taco. Woo, baby. That is a big. Gosh, he's got that front hook. There we go, baby. Deep cranking is by far one of the best ways to catch big bass during the summer, and today we're going to talk all about that, so stay tuned. It's going to be a good one. Woo! This video is brought to you by sportsmansoutfitters.com. One of my favorite deep diving crankbaits is a 5XD. And right now, Sportsman's Outfitters, you can get this 5XD for about $5.49. Most other places, it's closer to $7. So that's a cost savings of about 20%. So if you want to pick up a 5XD or any of the tackle that you're looking for, click those links down below in the description. Also, this channel, I can't believe it, we're about to hit 100,000 subscribers. And I'm giving away a $500 gift card to Sportsman's Outfitters along with a lot of other stuff to one of those lucky subscribers. So if you've not hit that sub button, hit it now before it's too late. One thing that I've noticed about deep diving crankbaits, and something that I've mentioned on this channel before, is it is not as easy to catch fish on a deep diving crankbait like it used to be. I think, you know, really when Kevin Van Dam started winning a ton of tournaments on a deep diving crankbait, a lot of guys started picking it up and a lot of guys started catching fish on it. But I just feel like bass in general has just kind of gotten conditioned to a deep diving crankbait, whether it's the rattle, the action, I don't know what it is, but it just doesn't seem as easy of a bait to go out there and catch fish. Now, like I talked about earlier, if you can get on this bite, I think it's the winning bite. I think this is what you can do to catch some of the biggest fish in your lake, which is why I want to talk about it. Now, today I have been out here fishing a Strike King 5XD. This is probably one of my favorite deep diving crankbaits, and the reason being is that it can dive upwards of 15 foot deep, and it has a little bit of a smaller profile to it. So whether you fish for really big fish or you live in, you know, an area like I do where there's some smaller average fish here in Ohio, I can still get a lot of bites with a Strike King 5XD. This is also one of my absolute favorite baits to use for fishing for smallmouth. I have caught a ton of smallmouth using a Strike King 5XD. Now, one of the biggest things you need to know about this bait and about a lot of treble hook lures on the market is that the hooks on it are just not good hooks at all. Now, a lot of times I like a Berkley Fusion hook on different treble hook baits, but for whatever reason, I really like that Mustad KVD triple grip hook on these deep diving crankbaits. Now, another thing about this specific bait is you want to make sure that it is tuned properly. And what I mean by tuned is that it is swimming in a straight line back to you. Now, this is not just for a 5XD, this is any deep diving crankbait that you buy. Sometimes you take them out of the package and they swim a little bit off to the side. Or sometimes you're out there and you start catching fish or you hit it off of a log or a rock and it will actually kind of mess the tune of that bait. And I'm gonna actually show you how to tune it right here. Anytime you're fishing a crankbait, you can tune a crankbait, and tuning it means that you can make it run straight. If it's running to the side, you can make it run straight. And all you gotta do is this little ring that's on the very top of a crankbait, you're actually just going to bend that one way or the other. So if it's running to the left, you're gonna bend it a hair to the right. If it's running to the right, you're gonna bend it a hair to the left. It's a very easy modification. It's something you can do in the boat. Now, the big thing that I heard, I think Rick Clunn say a long time ago, is he said, if you see that ring move, you've probably bent it too much. This is a very micro adjustment that you're going to do. Bend it a little bit, then cast it back into the water and see how it's swimming. And then you keep doing that until it's swimming real nice and straight. And the big reason, like that one's swimming a little bit better, but it's still just a touch off. I'm gonna bend it again, just a hair to the side. We'll see what this cast looks like now. Oh yeah, nice and straight. Now the reason that you want that crankbait running straight is that if it's running straight, it's going to dive at its maximum depth. It's going to get there very, very deep. If you're fishing, 12 foot of water and you're fishing a crankbait that runs 12 to 13 or 14 foot deep, if it's running off to the side, it may never hit the bottom. But if it's running straight, it's going to be hitting the bottom. So very, very key, very, very simple adjustment. There's one. Oh, it's barely hooked. God. It's got the one back hook in him. Anytime you're fishing a crankbait and you get a fish with a back hook, you can do exactly what I just did. I actually just did a couple figure eights with this fish, and as you can see now, he's hooked with both hooks. I'm actually gonna swing him. There we go. See that? Okay. Look at that. So that back hook was in there like that, and I did a couple of figure eights and got him to get hooked again under the underside. The back hook actually came out then, so that may have been a lost fish, but that is so key when you're fishing a deep diving crankbait, especially, when you're fighting a fish, anytime you're fishing a crankbait, not just a deep diving crankbait, being able to do a couple of figure eights and try to get another hook in that fish is really, really key. It's something I always try to do if I see him hooked like that. Nice. Now for a deep diving crankbait, the rod, reel, line that you use are extremely important. Now the reel, you want a little bit slower gear ratio. I would say anything around that 6.2 to 6.4 to 1 gear ratio. And sometimes if you are throwing really deep diving crankbaits, I even step it down to a 5.3 to 1 gear ratio. That really allows you to fish that bait all day without it just being very stressful on your hand. Now the rod is actually probably the most important part of this entire system. You want a longer rod, something that is at least 7 foot 6 inches in length. This is actually a 7 foot 11 inch rod. And you also want a moderate action. You want a rod that has more of a parabolic bend. And I actually fish pretty much a parabolic bending rod with all my treble hooked lures, but especially with that deep diving crankbait. Now that length, that 7 foot 11, 7 foot 6 inch is really going to help you to make a long bomb cast. And that is really important if you want to get that bait down to its maximum running depth. Now when it comes to the line, I like 12-pound fluorocarbon line. There are a few situations where I will actually up the line to something like a 15 or a 14-pound fluorocarbon. And usually that's when I'm fishing those really big baits, something like a 10XD that will dive 25 foot deep. I like to fish that big bait with 14 or 15-pound line because a lot of times you will actually break that bait off with 12-pound. You'll go to sling that bait way out there and it has a couple nicks in the line and that bait will just keep going forever. So now let's jump up on the front deck of the boat and show you a few tricks that you can do with your retrieve that will help you to catch a lot more bass with the deep diving crankbait. Now, when it comes to the retrieve with a deep diving crankbait, there are 3 main retrieves that I do. Now, the first thing that's really important to know about a deep diving crankbait is you want to make an extremely far cast. The further out that cast you can make, the deeper that bait is going to dive. So anytime I'm fishing the bait, I'm gonna really wing that bait out there. The first retrieve is going to be just a speed crank, where I'm really just bringing this across the bottom. I usually put the butt kind of right into my, oh God, one just thumped me right there. I usually put the butt of the rod right into kind of my rib area, and I'm literally just speed cranking this. I am making this bait just fly down there. There are so many days when I've been out there on the water and I'm deep cranking, or actually any cranking, and speed kills. If I can really bring that bait really fast, that is when I get those bites. Now, the next retrieve is something that I use specifically for brush pile fishing. And this is actually how I caught that fish earlier today. And when I'm fishing in a brush pile, you don't want to use speed a lot of times, because if you use speed, you're going to get that bait hung up. Now, I'm not saying you're not going to get it hung up fishing this other way, but you get it hung up a lot more fishing it extremely fast. Now, when I'm fishing that brush pile, again, I'm going to make that long cast out there. I'm gonna get that bait down to the depth, and once I start approaching that brush pile, a lot of times you're going to feel it with your rod because that line will sit on top of the brush pile as you're bringing it in. So you're gonna start to feel a lot of pressure. And so when you start to feel a lot pressure, that's when I start to do a slow sweeping retrieve, where I'm really just gonna slowly sweep that bait across the brush pile. And if I go slow like this, I can literally feel that bait ticking over each of the limbs. And slow with a deep diving crankbait, you're going to get through some nasty brush. You will actually be pretty shocked at how much brush down there you could get through with that deep diving crankbait. Now those two retrieves I probably use the most. This next retrieve is something that is really unique, and it's something that I actually learned by seeing another guy fish. Years ago, I was fishing a tournament down on Lake Chickamauga, and I could only get bit on a deep diving crankbait if they were really ripping the current through the lake. Once that current stopped, I could not catch a fish on a deep diving crankbait. And I remember specifically, I was fishing the last day, the championship day of this tournament, and I pulled up onto a little bar and I was dragging a big worm in a drop shot through this area. And a guy pulled up next to me and he was fishing a deep diving crankbait. And I saw him make a long bomb cast out there, and I'm just interested because I'm like, I haven't been able to get bit on a deep diving crankbait. And when I looked over at him, this guy looked like he was constantly setting the hook. Literally, his retrieve looked like he was constantly setting the hook. And I'm gonna show it to you right now. So he was reeling that bait down to depth, and then all of a sudden, this is what he was doing. He was going and reeling it literally all the way back to the boat, like this. All the way back to the boat. And I tell you what, this guy absolutely cracked the bass, and I could not believe it because there was no current running through the lake at this point, and this guy was absolutely cracking them on a deep diving crankbait. And then interestingly enough, during the 2022 Bassmaster Elite at Lake Pickwick, there was an Elite Series guy that was fishing this exact same way. So this is something that a lot of guys aren't doing, and what it does is it just causes a violent reaction strike from the bass. When you sweep that rod where you're almost setting the hook, that crankbait is gonna shoot forward and then it's gonna pause for a hair second. And a lot of times when it pauses, that is when they crack it. So if you are fishing around a lot of fishing pressure, a lot of other guys that are fishing deep diving crankbaits are a little bit tougher conditions, that is a way to get a bass to react to the bait when they might not react otherwise. Now, the last thing when it comes to deep diving crankbaits that is extremely important to know is when to put that bait down. Because like I talked about earlier in this video, they're not always gonna bite that bait. And I've seen certain days where they bite it really, really well, and then they just shut off to that bite altogether. I was fishing on Lake Oneida several years ago, catching a lot of smallmouth, and then it seemed like they just stopped biting it. And my buddy, who was also fishing during this tournament, he picked up a drop shot and kept catching smallmouth. I was too stubborn. I kept fishing the crankbait and I didn't catch any more fish. So there's a really specific time when you just shouldn't pick up that bait. And the first thing that I'm gonna tell you, if you're catching them really good on that bait and all of a sudden you start losing a couple of fish, or it seems like they stop getting hooked so well, that is usually a sign that things are kind of slowing down with the crankbait. And that's usually a sign when you should start to pick something else up. Now, one of my favorite lures to pick up when they stop biting that deep diving crankbait is a big worm. And I actually made a full video all about fishing a big worm that I'm gonna link right here. If you guys enjoyed this video, I think you'll enjoy this one as well. Please don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.